Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. The Killer Women Vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to the Killer Women podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network. I'm your host, Danielle Girard, and today's guest is Allie Reynolds. British-born Allie Reynolds is a former freestyle snowboarder who swapped her snowboard for a surfboard and moved to Gold Coast, Australia, where she taught English for 15 years. She still lives by the beach in Australia with her family. Her debut thriller, SHIVER, which I see over her shoulder there, sold in 24 territories and will be translated into 23 languages. And her second book, The SWELL, which I have right here, is another gorgeous cover. I can get my light to not shine on it. It was released on July 19th. So welcome, Allie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this is, before I start to ask all the questions that are running through my brain, tell our listeners a little bit about the premise of The SWELL, because it's pretty creepy.
Oh, thank you. So I pitched The SWELL as Point Break meets the beach with a bit of Agatha Christie thrown in and a bit of the Survivor TV show thrown in. So if you can kind of imagine all those elements, that gives you The SWELL. So it's set at a remote Australian beach, and it's about a reclusive tribe of surfers that have claimed that beach for their own.
Yes, they have. And our main character goes actually there in search of her friend Mickey. And Mickey has joined this tribe of surfers, and they are quite protective of this surf. So I have so many questions because, of course, I'm a non-surfer. My father was a surfer and grew up in LA and loved to surf, but I never could get my feet to stay on the board without falling off. So I was really drawn to this world, and obviously you're a surfer. So how easy, was it, or how hard was it to create this world around surfing? How did you come up with this?
Sure. Well, to start with, I think surfing is the hardest sport ever. I would definitely say that. I've tried just about every board sport there is, and for me, it's so hard. And all the Aussies learn from when they're a child, so they make it look so easy. But I only picked it up when I was about 27 years old, when I quit snowboarding. I picked it up as a safer option, but 20 years on, I'm kind of thinking, it's maybe not a safer option because it's smashed me up more than snowboarding has actually now. But it's an amazing and unique sport. It's extremely addictive. And one problem is there's only really a limited amount of waves. It's not like tennis or soccer where you just, hire a court or a pitch and you go play. There's a limited amount of waves, and more people in the world are discovering this amazing sport. So it gets very, very crowded out there in a lot of places. And especially in Australia, where I live here on the Gold Coast, I would say it's one of the most crowded surf spots in the earth here. And people imagine surfers, I think people who don't surf imagine them as being gentle type, sort of peaceful hippies, with long hair, maybe dance around the campfire and play guitar. But really, I would say it's not like that at all in my experience here. If you paddle out in the water there, you will see aggression and violence, intimidation tactics, bullying very, very regularly. There's localism, racism, just people very, very territorial about that wave spot. The strongest people will try to bully all the weaker ones. There's not very many women that surf, so you always feel quite intimidated actually paddling out there. So I kind of wanted to show this world, and I got thinking about how far might surfers actually go to find perfect uncrowded waves? And I think, yeah, they would go quite a long way.
I mean, it seems like that is, I 100% bought into the sort of relaxed hippie, you know, stereotype of surfers. So, okay, but I want to back up a second because you said surfing was hard, but it's interesting as a snowboarder, it's not an easy transition
I
because the
think a lot
waves
of
move or what?
yes, exactly. Every wave is different and every surf spot is so different and the wind can change. So it's different seconds later. And on a snowboard or on skis, you buy your lift pass and you sit in a nice, comfortable chairlift or cable car and it takes you up the mountain, nice and warm and dry. And then, anyone that can pay for a lift pass can go down. But surfing, a lot of it, it's almost impossible to paddle out a lot of times.
Right.
First you've got to fight the waves and duck dive and paddle out. And then you've got to fight the crowd for your wave. So, and then the water is moving. It's really
very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, you have to really earn your right to be there just to get out, just by getting out there to start with, right? You have to be really strong. That might have been where I failed, is just like getting out past those big waves. So sports therapy actually comes up as what is in your main character story. And I thought that was interesting because you said you quit snowboarding. Was that an injury?
I did have an injury, but I saw two very close female friends break their necks and be told they would never walk again, doing the trick that I knew I would need to try to get further up the rankings. So it made me really question, how much do I want this? Am I prepared to risk my mobility? And
your life,
I wasn't. I didn't want to pay that price. And I'm happy with my decision. So I pulled out at 27. And I was quite something was really missing from my life for a long time, but I was dating an Aussie guy in London and he took me to Australia on holiday and I discovered surfing. And at first I was like, wow, I can fall and not hurt myself, not break anything. But I've since discovered that is not always the case at all.
Right. Well, it looks rough out there. And if you I've been out enough to get tossed down to the bottom and thrown around in a little, like in a washing machine, and that's not that much fun. So one of the things, of course, that comes to mind when the book is set in this, extremely creepy, hard to reach, down a long gravel road, which at times is closed because it's not it's not passable. And we learn, of course, that's part of the way that we can keep people out of this cove. But the cove itself is this, it sounds beautiful, but also very, isolated and creepy. And I think it's a very successful landscape to set a book, because it has that, like you said, Agatha Christie, it's a little bit of a closed door mystery, right? There's only so many characters who really are there and to blame. And as I said to you before we started this call, I kept waiting for the shark, right? Because that's what I think of when I think of surfing. Where was the shark? And then tell our listeners what you said.
There was a shark and my editors made me take it out.
They didn't want you to write Jaws. Well, we read a fair number of stories over here about shark attacks of surfers in Australia. So I think it certainly happens, but it isn't.
It is common and it's always very shocking when it happens. I think in 2022 we had a really terrible year for shark attacks here. There was a record number. I think something like 12 people here were killed by sharks.
Oh my gosh, is that last year?
On my local beach, it was absolutely shocking. My local little beach here in probably waist deep water where I take my kids learning to surf there. And one poor guy, the shark went for him and the injuries were too serious. So
you still go into that water?
I think that's a sign of how addictive surfing is.
I guess it must be. Yeah, I feel okay that I never got addicted. Yes, well, that I think I'm sure it's still rare enough, right? But that is really scary. Well, the story certainly doesn't need a shark to raise the odds because it's it's got a lot of really high intensity scenes here. So one of the things we talked about a little bit, I want to talk about a little bit is the fact that all of these characters, and in different degrees, are act with some moral gray. There's nobody who sort of does always exactly the right thing. And so I wanted, that we talked a little bit about sort of how competitive the surf thing can be. Do you think that's something that's more prevalent in surfers? Are we all capable of doing things in that sort of gray to black area? What do you think?
I think, well, with competitiveness, I think, many top athletes are very, very competitive people, and that's how they get to be the best, because they are competitive. I think in real life, we often see men behaving like that, not so often women behaving like that, but female athletes, yeah, definitely, they are very, very competitive. So, and that's maybe a bit more overt than it would be for other people. So it might, we might notice it more. I think gray characters are really interesting. If they're all black, then it's not as interesting. So I think there's some good and some bad in all of us. And I kind of like to have the reader not quite knowing what somebody might do or what they might be capable of, and maybe really liking somebody 1 minute but then finding out something that they did, so they're forced to question what they think of that person. So
absolutely. Well, that's what's so interesting about the characters. Even our protagonists, everybody sort of makes I will say questionable decisions, right? Everybody. So when you obviously imagined your last book, it looks like it was set and I haven't read the one yet, but I'm looking forward to it. It's set obviously in the mountains. Is it in the ski and the snowboarder world?
Yes.
So this book, when you thought about sort of so the idea of setting a book in the surfing world, you sort of explain, and that's, I have not read another. I've seen Point Break, right, which is I guess the closest thing I have to a thriller set in the surfing world, but. How did you come up with one character first? Since we have, like you said, a tribe, and how did it sort of emerge, the interplay, and without giving anything away too, but how did sort of the story develop? Were you focused on one person and then it grew, or how did that happen?
Well, I think I had several ideas when I was trying to write my book too, when I began writing. And really, I was inspired so much by, two of my favorite books, one of them being this one, The Beach by Alex Garland. It's such an amazing story. We have got these, backpackers that discover their own secret beach and form a community there. And it seems like a paradise. But of course, there's darkness in all of these characters that, comes out. So I had an idea of doing a sort of surfing version of that, incorporating that aspect into it. I also love how in Point Break, we've got this, undercover cop who is tasked with investigating this tribe of surfers. And he gets so sucked in and drawn into this group and just starts to feel the passion that they feel for the waves and the sport, that he ends up being really morally torn between his duty as his job and his belonging and his love for this sport, and he has some really difficult choices to make. So those aspects sort of merged in my head. And then, of course, I was thinking someone's got to die.
Yeah, of course.
So, who died and why? I think that's where I start my plotting. And who killed them? Why would they want to do that? Who is going to be trying to, discover who killed them, and what is that relationship, to that person? You need a compelling reason for your main character to be in that situation. So I kind of felt that, the jeopardy of having her best friend in this potentially dangerous situation, and then trying to subtly investigate what actually happened here. Australia also has a long history of missing backpackers.
Yes.
It's quite a dark aspect of it. There's those famous horror movies. Is it, what is it called? There's one where there's a couple traveling in the outback and they get kidnapped by that. There's quite a few really terrifying movies like that.
Yes.
Sadly, we do see it in the media a fair bit. backpackers going missing. So of course the thriller side of writer of me always is questioning, you know, I wonder why, and you know, asking sort of questions and
Right.
coming up with possible scenarios. So I tied that in a little bit to this story.
Well, and you motivate Mickey's decision to go in and look for, I mean, sorry, Kenna's decision to go and look for Mickey, because there are, as she's arriving in Sydney, there are these posters that she sees of these, you know, missing backpackers, women, that make her think that, you know, Mickey's acting strangely. The other character, I mean, the characters are all, and I don't want to ruin anything, and I'm going to be very careful. But one of the characters I wanted to sort of delve into a little bit, because you talked about sort of the way in which maybe women athletes, and of course this is a show about women, and while we love men, I really like to investigate sort of and understand the women motivations and the women perspectives. And so I'm super interested by Sky, who is sort of the leader of the tribe. And tell me, like, how, you know, tell us a little bit about her. I don't think we're giving anything away to say that there's a particularly strong woman in the tribe. And tell us sort of, how did she emerge in your mind?
Sure. So I'm a massive reader. I always have been. I love reading, you know, a lot of thrillers and crime novels. And I love seeing really strong female characters. And quite often, I think, especially in the past, we used to see, you know, female characters being kind of the weak characters, the victims, and the men have to protect them. So as a woman, I try and, you know, correct, you know, all this history by, you know, reversing this and having very strong female characters that maybe the men are a little bit intimidated by. So yes, Sky,
and they are intimidated by her. And actually I was intimidated by her. You can tell she's, you know, she has a very strong and also she's pretty, I mean, she's not just sort of strong and sort of hard person, she's very physically fit. She sort of runs them through these incredibly difficult physical drills. So she's impressive. I really appreciated reading about her. You know,
she
and
was
then of course
inspired by one of my sporting idols, the big wave Hawaiian surfer Keala Kennelly, who's this amazing woman that was surfing these huge Hawaiian waves, you know, before hardly any other women were doing it. So I've watched videos of her. She did a TED talk on fear, which I just found massively inspiring. Because it's, you know, I get really scared sometimes when I do it's, well, usually I'm terrified if I'm in big waves or, you know, doing a dangerous sport. So I'm just fascinated by, you know, women like her who face that fear.
Right.
And I had this idea of, you know, creating a character that's all about facing your fear, and she's trying to force other people to face that fear. And that is her whole mentality. And she kind of draws the others into it.
Well, that was one of my actually that was absolutely a question on my list, was the sort of the idea of fear. And because one male character in particular, you know, has a lot of fear, and Sky is really trying to help him work through that. So tell us about, like, I'm curious about that, both as a storyteller and also as an athlete. You know, and perhaps also the point of view that you heard in the Hawaiian Surfers TED Talk. You know, what is it? Because fear must also motivate you, right? It must motivate these people as well as sort of slow them down. So was that your experience? How did that, you know, how did that sort of emerge?
I think I was definitely not really brave. I don't really know why I'm drawn to extreme sports, because I would not say I'm brave at all. Like when I was snowboarding in the half pipe, I would be absolutely terrified, like all day long. My heart rate would have been so high, my adrenaline. But if you do that all day, you're jumping out of this icy half pipe and then you survive, you know, the relief is like nothing else. And I suppose that feeling pulls you back the next day. You get used to running on that level of adrenaline. And it's the same in the surf. You're out there, if it's, you know, got any size in the waves, you just anything could happen. So it's you everything else in your life, all your little worries or things that you've got to do, the chores at home, you don't think about that whatsoever. You're purely in the moment. I think that's another thing that draws these people to sports. They talk about flow, where you're just absolutely focused on what you're doing, and time, you know, almost seems to slow. It's just a really amazing feeling that, yeah,
you have to be focused because you might die, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it is really interesting. And I love that. And also I think that in particular, the use of that, the one character who sort of really suffered from fear, it's a really humanizing element, right? Because if everybody, and that's another thing I sort of love about looking and when I'm reading books is sort of the ways in which authors, and you did this very well, I think, take a character who does something that I personally would never do, will never do, but makes them human in a way that feels very real to me. And also that we can offer, you know, sympathy, and it's a universal feeling. Fear is universal, whether or not, you know, you're somebody who conquers fear, the big fear of being in the waves or not, right? I think that was, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And another sort of side plot and nuance to the story, which I thought was really effective. And that, and that, as I'm gonna keep going, and that the thing that I really enjoyed about the story is that we really got to know these, you know, people really well. And so even though we know that there's a killer among them, or even, you know, more than one killer, because we have no idea really, it's we also all are, like you said, they're all kind of also likable in many ways. And that is it kind of adds to the stress of and the excitement of reading the book, right? You're like, wait, do I like the killer? Is the killer somebody that I, you know, that I like? So
I guess as a writer, I'm sort of, I write about the things that interest me. Maybe that's just what any writer does, really. So the things that interest me, you know, I guess sports, fear, thrill seekers, you know, if there's something I don't understand but I'm curious about, sometimes I'll try and write it so to see if I can, you know, find an explanation for it in my head. And I did actually get researching, you know, different thrill seekers, you know, and there's quite a lot of reasons for why people do those things. Sometimes they're trying to escape from a very high pressure job, for example, or you know, they're depressed and that pulls them out of that depression, or, you know, all kinds of reasons. So,
and they each have their, I mean, they're each very different. It's not like we have, you know, 6 or 7 people with sort of the same background. You know, these are not 6 or 7 hippie surfers. They're people who came from very different lives and lost things and gave up things. And so it's a really fun story because you get to know all these people, and I love it so much. So now you've got the one on the mountain and you've got the surfing story. So where are we going? What's book 3, Allie? What are we working on?
I'm still figuring it out. I've got some ideas, but I've held off starting because I think it's all about, you know, getting the right idea, you know, really sort of tweaking it so it's exactly, you know, the right one. And I think with the with the Swell, I had a deadline. So I kind of started writing before I was quite ready to. And then I thought it took me 4 times as long. It took me 2 full years to write because I kept having to change things and going down dead ends and write a different ending. So it wasn't clear enough in my head. So this time around, I'm trying to, you know, hold off a little bit. Definitely, I would like to try and take readers to another world. That's what I love as a reader, you know, some of my favorite books are set in worlds that I know nothing about, and they just give you this experience of living in this really strange world. One of my favorite book that I read last year was this one, Bear Town.
I love him. He's so wonderful.
I had heard it. It's not like, it's literary fiction, so it's really not my genre. So I hadn't read it before, but I'd seen it all over Instagram, and then it's about ice hockey. And I've seen an ice hockey match. I don't know anything about ice hockey. Right. But I'm fascinated by this whole world where people revolve around ice hockey. So.
And they do. That's more that. That I know a little bit more about. That's more sort of in my neck of the woods. But yes, and that is a wonderful story, and it
Yeah,
has some thriller elements as well, right?
yes,
I mean, that's the
true.
thing
Yeah,
that's fun about yeah, I think it's really fun about reading different types of books is, some of them aren't thrillers, but they certainly, good storytelling always has
yes.
some suspense. So it sounds like I understand exactly what you mean. You're like, you really are like, I'm also somebody who writes I can write a whole book 3 times because I don't quite have it figured out. Although I've never quite figured out how to figure it out before I start.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I admire that you're doing that. So do you, as you've written these books now, are you a plot, like, was Shiver plotted out start to finish? So you knew.
Yeah, well, I had spent 20 years before I wrote Shiver trying and failing to write a book, and I could never, finish it satisfactorily so that I could, actually, this is done. I'm going to submit it to agents or publishers. And I finally figured out that was because I didn't plan them. I got in a mess with the storyline. The arc was wrong, or I couldn't figure out the ending. So I studied lots of books on writing craft and story structure and planning methods. And so Shiver was the first book I planned. I plotted it all out onto little Post-it notes, put them all on a whiteboard, played a lot with the order because it has a dual timeline. So there was lots of shuffling and trying to find the right order. And I know I couldn't have written it without planning it like that. And I was lucky with Shiver. It took me about 6 months to write.
Wow.
It just came out really smoothly. And then I, spent a month or so editing at the end, and that was it. So I thought, wow, I've got this process now. I'll try the same with the SWELL. And yeah, oh my God, it just did not happen like that at all. I think every story is different. That's what other writers seem to say.
Yeah.
So I just went down all these dead ends, and something was too similar to Shiver, so I had to change it. And yeah, so it took 2 years and 6 rounds of structural edits. So,
well, it was a hard time. It wasn't like, it wasn't a normal, I think I've heard so many pandemic writing stories, and I don't think you can count that as 2 years, because that was just so what a mess. So
I had my little kids at home, and school closures. Yeah.
Right, that doesn't count. You can't, the fact that you finished a book is amazing. But I have to say, I just published my 16th book.
Wow.
And 100%, no two are the same. And I wish I had, I at books, 2 and 3 and 7, I thought, I got this, I know what I'm doing. And I have yet to figure out, and I know some people do. So I hopefully you'll get it worked out. But for me, it's every book feels like reinventing the wheel.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah, I've heard that so much. There's some writers I've heard that one planning method will work for them for 2 books, and then the next time it doesn't work, and then they find a new method that works for a couple of books. So I guess we're always, changing and evolving as writers, and each story is different. So
it requires something different. Well, I love the idea of being a planner. I've never been a planner, but I think that's brilliant, because I do feel like, even when I successfully finish a book, my out file, my discarded words is usually almost as big as the book itself. So it's a lot. It seems like
that feeling.
not the most efficient way to do it. Well, that's really exciting. I won't ask any more about that book because you're still churning it in your brain, but we'll look forward to it. And so, okay, so tell us, so I'm going to show this fabulous cover one more time. Tell our readers and stuff where to find you, our listeners, I should say, where to find you online, where you are on Instagram and Facebook, and where you prefer to be found.
Sure. So I'm on Instagram a lot. It's at author Allie R. And also I'm on Twitter a fair bit, same at author Allie R. I have a Facebook page, but I hardly use it. I'm such a technophobe. And I've got an author website as well, www.allie-reynolds.com. So
okay, and for listeners, Allie is ALLIE, because
that's right. Yeah,
and you are Allie R. And Allie-Reynolds. Well, this was a wonderful story. I enjoyed it so much, and what a fun to get to talk to you about the world of surfing and extreme sports. And all of that chat makes me just want to put my feet up and lay down on my couch for a while. But that's fabulous. Well, I look forward to the next thing you do. And it's been so fun having you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed
Absolutely.
the chat. Thank you.
Thanks. Me too. This is Danielle Girard, and you've joined us for Killer Women. Join us next time, and thank you for joining. Bye.